Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to another upload on the O&O Sports YouTube channel. We are back with another conference prediction. As always, you voted on it, and today we have the SEC. If you want to vote on the next conference, you'll have two to choose from in the community tab. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. At 16 in our prediction, we have the Vanderbilt Commodores. Now, this will come as a surprise to absolutely nobody. Vanderbilt has been in the SEC's basement for about a decade now, and in his first 3 seasons as Vanderbilt's head coach, Clark Lee has gone 9-27, pretty awful. And after 2022, it looked like Vanderbilt could possibly make a jump to a bowl team. They went 5-7 in 2022. Things were looking a little bit higher, a little bit up, and then following that year, they went 2-10 in 2023, and it looks like Clark Lee is on the hot seat this year, and it would make sense, although Vanderbilt's probably not going to hire a big-time name to replace him. Kind of miserable in his stint thus far, and overall the roster isn't terrible, not great, but we have them rated as an 80.6, a little bit above average, and we have them finishing 3-9 this year, with a winless conference record, which should spell the end of the Clark Lee era in Vanderbilt. And at 15, we have the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now, people forget just a few short years ago, Sam Pittman looked like he had Arkansas on the up and up, and now it's not looking great for his tenure. He's going to be another hot seat candidate, and based on the season we're predicting, it's pretty uncertain. It could go either way, honestly, with what the future holds for Sam Pittman at Arkansas. Arkansas is going to come out to a pretty modest 85.7, not awful, and we have them going 4-8 with a 1-7 conference record for the second year in a row. But one of the teams you see on the right hand side of your screen does not look like the others. We acknowledge that wholeheartedly. We have Arkansas beating LSU in a trap game that we'll get more into later, and we think this game alone could save Pittman for one more year. It could go either way, honestly. Not a great season overall, but with that big of an upset over your rival, it could have him hanging on by a thread in Fayetteville. And at 14, we have the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Mississippi State has had one of the more underrated off seasons thus far in bringing in Jeff Lebby to replace Zach Arnett as their new head coach. There's a lot of unknowns there. Lebby has never been a head coach, so rightfully people haven't been too high, but he is one of the best offensive minds in the sport without a shadow of a doubt. And the Bulldogs have been their best when they have an offensive focused team under guys like Dan Mullen and Mike Leach. So we think it's a pretty healthy pairing. Obviously, there's going to be a lot to work out as a head coach for Lebby, but in terms of pure scheming, we think it's a pretty good fit. And they've added some great skill position talent in Blake Shapen from Baylor and guys like Kevin Coleman from Louisville to go along with a lot of O-line depth. But the defense, admittedly, is going to be very young and unproven. Probably not a great unit if we had to guess. But for what it's worth, Lebby has gotten off to a pretty okay start. We have Mississippi State rated as an 82.5, and we predict them to go 5-7 with a 1-7 conference record. Obviously not a great record in the conference, but 5-7 is something you can hopefully build off of, maybe add a couple wins next year. And at 13, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks. Shane Beamer could be in hot water this year. We don't think he's quite a hot seat candidate necessarily, but after a disappointing 5-7 finish last year, we think it's pretty safe to say that Beamer Ball has his back against the wall this year. We do think they have a pretty decent roster this year, but that schedule is going to be rough, to say the very least. They play Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, and Clemson this year, an absolute gauntlet, and we don't think they're going to be the favorite in any of those matchups, honestly. Shane Beamer's got a lot of work to do, and he's going to have to overcome a lot of adversity if he wants the Gamecocks to go bowling this year, and if he wants to keep his job. I mean, like we said, not necessarily a hot seat candidate, but if things go wrong, they can only pull out 2-3 wins, it's definitely going to be a possibility. And we don't think they're going to go bowling this year. We have them at an 84.7 overall, and we project them to go 5-7 like Mississippi State, but 2-6 in the conference, with a big home win over Texas A&M to keep Beamer off the hot seat most likely for another year. And at 12, we have the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, Kentucky has a pretty great roster this year. They bring in Brock Vandegrift to take over as their quarterback. Very solid addition. He could be very good. He's going to be a junior. And their defense is also very underrated. And overall, Stoops has brought in some great talent to help the offense, but we just aren't super confident in them overall this year. Now, Stoops has done an absolutely remarkable job in his time at Kentucky, and he's been able to elevate them to an above average top half SEC team. But we think there's just going to be better teams that they'll face this year. And while we do think they have the capacity to upset a team or two this year, we aren't really expecting them to do that. Overall, we have them rated as an 89.5, pretty solid, and we project they'll go 6-6 with a 2-6 conference record, about on par with their last 2 seasons, and they'll still be bowl eligible. And at 11, we have the Florida Gators. We've talked about Florida previously on this channel, and unfortunately, we think the timing was just all wrong for a Billy Napier era at Florida, which seems like it's on the cusp of ending. He could end up leading Florida to a surprisingly good season, in which case he'll keep his job another year, but the schedule is just awful. We really don't have much confidence in Florida overall this year, and we think Napier, for what it's worth, has constructed a pretty great roster. We have them listed as an 88.4 overall, but they're going to face 8 or 9 teams on that schedule who will be better than them, on paper at least, and we have them going 5-7, with a 3-5 conference record, falling just short of 500. And unfortunately for Napier, we think that could be enough for Florida to let him go after the season. And at 10, another team we've talked about a lot in this channel. It is the Oklahoma Sooners. Be sure to go and check out that video after this one. Like Florida, we think Oklahoma is in a bit of a right place, wrong time situation heading into the season. Oklahoma's schedule isn't nearly as bad as Florida's, and we think Venables has Oklahoma in a much better place overall than Napier does at Florida, but they lose some important pieces from last year to the portal and the draft, and they chose probably the worst time to transition from the Big 12 to the SEC. There's probably 5 or 6 teams that have an actual shot at winning the conference. And teams like Missouri, Ole Miss, Auburn even, and Tennessee are much less formidable than they have been in the past. Overall, we have Oklahoma as a 90.3, and we predict them to go 7-5 with a 3-5 conference record in their first year in the SEC. And at 9, we have the Texas A&M Aggies. Aggies fans, you can take a deep breath. The Jimbo Fisher era is over in College Station, and they picked a great replacement, in our opinion, for the program in Duke's Mike Elko. Elko was known for doing a lot more with a lot less in a lot less time than Jimbo did at Texas A&M, and we think that is crucial for a program so rich with talent like Texas A&M. They're going to have a great roster once again this year, maybe not as good as the past 3 years, but still a great roster. And now they're going to have someone who knows how to use and develop that talent, something they've been dying for the past few years. Jimbo just couldn't get it together. But the SEC is a much different ballgame than the ACC for a guy like Elko. The schedule is going to be much harder than a typical ACC schedule, but we think the talent Elko will have to work with will mitigate the effects of that to some degree in his first year. We have Texas A&M listed as an 87.5 overall, and we have them going 7-5 with a 4-4 conference record, the second year in a row with that record, but with the future looking much more promising under Mike Elko. And at 8, we have the Auburn Tigers. Speaking purely on the field, we think Auburn hiring Hugh Freeze was one of the best moves they've made in recent years. And despite undergoing a mini rebuild in his first year, we think Freeze and his team looked much better than expected, despite having a pretty up and down year. And regardless of that, they're bringing in a lot of talent at wide receiver, something they desperately needed last year, and they bring in a ton of depth to help strengthen the defense, another thing that plagued them at times last year. And we think Auburn is on the rise. We have them pegged at a 90 overall, and we believe they will go 8-4 with a 4-4 conference record with help from a decently lenient SEC schedule. And at 7, we have a different Tigers. We have the LSU Tigers, and unfortunately in this prediction, as you will see going forward, someone had to get the short end of the stick, and this year we think it's going to be LSU. Now, that's not to say LSU will be bad. Just to be clear, we think Brian Kelly has done an amazing job so far at LSU, but they'll be losing a decent amount of talent this year, including Heisman winner Jaden Daniels. And we don't think Garrett Nussmeier is bad, but there's going to be a bit of a transition of power there. The offense is going to look a lot different, most likely, and we think that could affect LSU negatively in the short term. But overall, we have LSU coming out to a 90.4, but record-wise, we have them finishing 9-3 with a 5-4 conference record, with a big upset loss, like we said, at Arkansas, who we believe will be a trap game for them, as it's sandwiched in between a game against Ole Miss and then games against Texas A&M and Alabama. They're going to go on the road to Fayetteville. It is a rivalry game. We think they're going to be looking ahead a little bit there. And at 6, we have the Missouri Tigers, our third Tigers in a row. And before making this video, Missouri was a team that we kind of just assumed could win 10 games and make the playoff. But I don't think we, or really anyone else, has really factored in just how good the SEC is going to be this year. We still think Missouri is poised for another great year under Eli Drinkwitz, but they probably won't be a playoff team based on our predictions. The SEC looks like it's going to be a photo finish this year, and unfortunately for Missouri, we don't think that their wins will be strong enough to make the final cut. They are still very talented, obviously. They have Luther Burden, who is the odds-on favorite to win the Biletnikoff, who we think will probably win the Biletnikoff, and Brady Cook, who will probably be a top quarterback in next year's draft. The offensive line is both solid and young, and the defense looks pretty great all around. We just think there will be teams with better resumes overall in the conference that will beat them out for that playoff spot. But for their overall, we have Missouri at an 89.3, and we have them finishing 10-2 with a 6-2 conference record, something that may look very familiar going forward. And at 5, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide. So for those who have been living under rocks, Alabama had quite an eventful offseason this year. Nick Saban retired. Virtually every big coach in the country was rumored to be taking the Alabama job at some point, and then eventually they did land on Washington's Kalen DeBoer, and some people looked at DeBoer's recruiting history and chose to write him off. But for those like us who held Alabama stock after Saban's departure, we are looking pretty good right now. They did lose a lot of talent, but they retained Heisman candidate Jalen Milroe, and he's poised to take another step in the right direction under Kalen DeBoer, who is notoriously great at developing quarterbacks. And the team overall is still filled, stacked to the brim with talent, and Alabama has not skipped a beat in recruiting. And DeBoer and Alabama are truly letting those naysayers know this offseason, as we have them listed at a near elite 94.2 overall, and we predict them going 10-2 with a 6-2 conference record. They're bound to face a few hurdles this year, and while we are confident in DeBoer and his staff, we aren't so sure they'll be an SEC championship appearing team once again in 2024. And at 4, we have the Tennessee Volunteers. We dropped a video on Tennessee just a few weeks ago, and thanks to your support, that video is our most popular on the channel. Thank you so much for that. We go deep into the hurdles Tennessee will face this year in that video, and if you've already seen it, you know we have them as a 92.0, and we predict them also to go 10-2 with a 6-2 conference record. Josh Heupel has Tennessee in both a great spot right now and in the future, and we think Tennessee is going to be a pretty good sleeper pick this year in the SEC. And if you've not seen that video, be sure to go watch it after this video. And going into the top 3, at 3, we have the Ole Miss Rebels. Again, we've talked about Ole Miss previously. Be sure to check that video out for a full breakdown on Ole Miss. In short, we think Jackson Dart and the offense as a whole is fantastic. We think the defense will take a huge step forward, and luckily for them, they'll have a stronger resume that'll put them in the top 3 teams in the SEC, at least in our prediction. Overall, we have them at a 92.3, and we also have them going 10-2 with a 6-2 conference record. And if you haven't been paying attention to the schedule predictions on the right hand side of your screen this video, go back and rewatch, because we are predicting utter chaos in the SEC this year. And on par with the chaos, at 2, we have SEC newcomer, the Texas Longhorns. Texas is another team that had a stellar offseason, and if they're your pick to win it all this year, we do not blame you at all. Their roster is absolutely loaded on both sides. They bring back Quinn Ewers, who's another safe Heisman pick. They have one of the best skill position groups in the country, especially at wide receiver, and they addressed their biggest issue from last season, the defensive secondary, by adding some dogs in that position group. And they're overall just an insanely scary team this year. We have them at a 93.4 overall, and we predict they'll go 11-1 with a 7-1 conference record. Steve Sarkisian has been grinding since losing in the playoffs, and he'll have one of the best teams on paper, but the games won't be played on paper. They're going to have to go out there and prove it, and we think they will. But our next team and our final team of the video has already proved it time and time again. It is the Georgia Bulldogs. Unfortunately, the program has had some pretty awful off the field issues this offseason, which Kirby Smart and his staff and the athletics program altogether have been trying to address. But they're going to field another elite team this year. We have them tied as the highest overall team in the country this year at a 95.4 overall. The defense loses a lot of key players from last year, but it's Georgia. They'll be able to replace them. And Carson Beck was great last year, and the offense is looking pretty good so far despite having to cut wide receiver Ra Thomas. We still think they have an SEC championship caliber roster, and more importantly, a national championship caliber coaching staff. As long as Kirby is at Georgia, the Dogs will always be a safe bet to win the conference. And we think with Saban retiring, Kirby has now earned the reins as the best coach in the sport. And he's still very young for a head coach. So for you who is watching right now, get ready to learn glory, glory, buddy. And that is going to wrap up this video. Let us know what you think. Where do you think we went right? Where do you think we went wrong? And be sure to like and subscribe. Share with your cool aunt, your weird uncle, your babysitter from 15 years ago, anybody you can think of. It really helps us out a lot. And if you want to help decide the next conference that gets a full prediction, be sure to go to the community tab after this video and vote. And as always, we appreciate you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.